LaMotte. I'm president of LaMotte Company, and I live here in Kent County, outside of Chestertown, about 8 miles out in Quaker Neck. As my father was a production manager for LaMotte Company before he went into the ministry. He said some of it came to him when he was in Korea. He was a lieutenant in the Army, and he went over right as the war was ending. And he saw a lot of the devastation over there, and it really caused him to think about the bigger picture and what's going on. After he came back, he could never escape that, and he got more and more involved in Emmanuel Church, and then finally decided, I'm going to go back to school and pursue the ministry. One of his real strengths was his sermons were great, but it was somewhere in the late 70s, I think, that he heard Dr. Ritchie speak about the near-death experience, and he started getting intrigued by that, but didn't really have time to pursue that. Dr. Ritchie was one of the first to come forward to describe his near-death experience, and he wrote a book about it, and he went around speaking about it, and he came to Portsmouth, Virginia, and that's where Dad heard him speak for the first time. And what he said so intrigued Dad based on all that he had studied and all that he had preached about. I mean, I remember he said he went to all the other clergy in the area, and he found that a couple of them had had near-death experiences themselves, which really surprised him. And I had asked him if he'd had any similar experiences, anything out of the ordinary, and he did describe one blinding light experience that he can't explain. Sitting at home, said that he felt an energy all around him that he couldn't describe. It wasn't until he said he was going to Hawaii for the International Association of Near-Death Studies Convention that I said, do you need anybody to carry your suitcases? Because I've never been there. I'd love to go along. I don't think I want to go to any of the talks, but I'd love to go out there and share the trip with you. And he said, well, your mother's not going, so yeah, I would love it, and I'd pay your way if you'd come with me. And as we got on the plane, he said, here's a book you might want to read that'll give you a little background on this. I think it was Kenneth Ring's Heading Toward Omega. And I got hooked from the moment I started reading that. I read the rest of the flight out there, and I got so curious I ended up going to as many talks as I could in between efforts to surf. I had always wanted to learn to surf, and Waikiki was a great place to experiment. For me, I always felt like I had a relationship with God. I was always talking to Him or praying to Him, but nothing much beyond that. And I was raised to believe that there is this loving Creator, and there is this Christ Lord who helps us and looks after us, and it's good to talk with Him, and when you die you'll be with Him. And I never really thought about it much beyond that. And then when I started reading this book of this researcher who was sharing many stories of people he had interviewed and describing consistently what happened when they died, and how their consciousness just did not stop. In most cases they were watching themselves, and then they went towards this light that was just all love, like love that they'd never experienced. And there were so many elements in that touched on my understanding of Christianity, but just went so much further. It was fun because my father at the same time was going through the same experience. Though he was a few years ahead of me with his reading, he would hear a lecture or read a book and then share it with me, and vice versa. He and I were both so interested in this subject that there was just no way it was going to end when he went over, and it made it much easier for me knowing that he's right on the other side. And I am consciously or subconsciously always looking for the opportunity for the subject to come up and then start asking questions. It's like being fascinated by bird watching or something. If anything comes up related to it, you want to jump in. But it's amazing how many people have had, I'll call them interesting experiences in their lives, and believe there's more than what they've grown up hearing at church or school or wherever, and jump at the opportunity to say, hey, I had something like that happen. Do you think this is what this meant? And they get very interested. But nevertheless, the subject of are we completely on our own, total free will, whatever happens, happens, everything is just coincidence, or is there a little more than that, is something I wrestle with all the time. And my feeling is we are being bumped, that we do have free will, that it's meant that we be left alone to make our own choices, that's all part of us growing. I think if anyone honestly looks back over their life, they can certainly see a lot of times when they've been bumped in some direction. And of course I fall back on the near-death experiencers who come back and say, I was led to understand that we're not completely alone. It was clear that we had some help from the other side. You really, to a large degree, are what you believe. Having such a more confident view of the fact that this life goes on, that death is just a transition into this other dimension, takes away any fear from that standpoint, and it also, you're not nearly as anxious as everything in life. We're so focused on survival and fulfilling our roles that we're playing here. We get so wrapped up in that, and when you see that there's a much bigger picture going on here, and that, okay, I'm not successful in this venture or that venture, it just takes all the pressure off. Because it is so hard when we're running through this forest of life. I mean, we cannot see around the next corner. If we can understand that this is just part of it, and there are loving beings who are trying to help us through this forest, then it takes so much of the anxiety out of this life. I had asked my father, not on this subject, but I think I was duck hunting with him. Last time I ever took him duck hunting, down at Deal Island, way out in the marsh, we're sitting in lounge chairs, and I said, Dad, looking back over your life, what is the one thing you would have done differently? And he said, I wouldn't have been nearly as anxious about everything. Everything works out.